Hey, Pastor Brett here, and we come to Genesis chapter 41 through 50, and I want to zero in on this whole section's all about Joseph, the fourth patriarch. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now Joseph. And Joseph's story is profound. It's amazing. I'll never forget the first time I read this story, or at least recall reading this story. I was 16, 17 years old. That was at my cousin's wedding in Michigan. Traveled up from Illinois. We were staying at a bed and breakfast, and I think one night I started reading this, and I don't know why I was reading it, but I was. Next morning I got up and I had to finish it. I was so riveted by this story of Joseph that starts in chapter 37 and goes all the way to chapter 50. Here was a guy that experienced so much brokenness. He was hated by his brothers, despised by them, because he was the favored child among all of Daddy's boys. There was a bunch of them. He was the favorite. There's a little lesson there in parenting, of course. But he's hated by his brothers really unduly to a level. They wanted to kill him. They plotted to kill him, but they decided not to do it. Instead, they sold him into slavery. Horrible thing to happen. Goes to Egypt. He's in Potiphar's household. Rises in rank in Potiphar's household to where his master puts him in charge of the household. One thing he couldn't have, of course, and he didn't want, Potiphar's wife desired him sexually. Tried to sleep with him. Tried it over and over again, trying to get this young, attractive, successful young man. Joseph tried over and over again to get him to sleep with her, but his integrity was great. He would not do it. So finally, in her frustration, her anger, she accused him of what she was wanting to do. And he was thrown into prison. This major misfortune number 2 in his life. Not his fault, really, again. In the prison, he's languishing, but God's allowing him to rise up. A couple guys have some dreams. He interprets it for them. The one who had a favorable outcome to his dream and his life was free, and he forgot all about Joseph. Third misfortune. Joseph's like, remember me when you get out of here. I'm in here unjustly. I don't deserve this. He forgot all about him. Think about that. Hated by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused of a horrible crime, thrown in prison as a result. Those are 2 horrible things. And then a third horrible thing he's forgotten about when he's got somebody who's willing to stand up for him and speak the truth for him. Remember him. He's forgotten. You and I have all kinds of bad things happen in our lives. And sometimes, like in the case of Joseph, sometimes it's our fault, of course, but in Joseph's case, none of this was his fault, really. At this point in time, you got to think, where are you at, God? But he kept his faith in God. And then amazing things happens. He had these dreams when he was a boy, 17 years old, that he told his brothers about how they were going to bow down to him someday. And that's part of the reason why they hated him so much. They hated him all the more because of this. They were jealous of him. Well, his dreams were actually true, prophetically true. Some 2 decades after he had these dreams as a teenage boy, his brothers came to Egypt to get food. And who did they come to? Joseph. Joseph was in the top position in the government at that point. And he had really had their life in his hands. He could have had them killed, imprisoned. He played a little cat and mouse game with him a little bit, but ultimately he forgave them. In Genesis chapter 50, we see this wonderful reality of him seeing God through this whole process and him demonstrating forgiveness. Genesis chapter 50. Verse 15, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph, saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now, please forgive the sin of the servants of the God of your father." When their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. Remember, Joseph had this dream at 17 years old that his brothers would come bow down before him. But Joseph said to them, verse 19, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. He chose forgiveness. And in the end, even more importantly, he chose to see all his misfortune, all his past brokenness, as filtering through the sovereign will of God for greater purposes. And that's the point I want us to drive us to with this particular message. And that's the point I want to drive us to with this particular message. This idea, what others mean for evil, when you belong to Jesus, when you're God's person, when you're his child, when others intend to do evil in your life, if God allows any of that to harm you, it's because ultimately he has a greater purpose at work that the person who's hurting you doesn't even know about. We have to see all of life through this filter of knowing that God is all-powerful and God is all good. Therefore, if he has allowed these misfortunes in my life, for Joseph, think about how much he went through. His brothers sold him into slavery, separated him from his homeland, from his family, and now he's a slave. And then he stays faithful to the Lord. He's a person of integrity. With God's favor upon him, he rises up into that household. And then his master's wife falsely accuses him, and he falls from that position back to a low position again in prison. But he doesn't give up. He trusts in the Lord. He rises back up again, and then he's forgotten by the one who he helped out. Over and over again, 3 times, he suffers greatly at the hands of others. His brothers hated him, sold him into slavery. Potiphar's wife desired him, couldn't have him because of his integrity. And so then accuses him of what she was guilty of. Makes him go to prison for what she was guilty of. And then when he's in prison, he helps a guy out. The guy's in a position to help him and forgets about him. You ever felt like people have been cruel to you? They hate you. They treat you unjustly. They falsely accuse you. Or they forget you. Only use you for what they need. A lot of misfortune. And when he's finally in a position to exact some revenge on the ones who are the very ones to blame for all of that, he wouldn't have had the misfortune with the guy forgetting him. He wouldn't have the misfortune with Potiphar's wife. He wouldn't have had the misfortune. None of that in Egypt, misfortune would have happened if his brothers hadn't been so cruel and hated him. Now they're before him, and he holds their life in his hands, and he forgives them. And one of the reasons is because he saw the hand of an almighty, all-good God at work through it all. Think back through the difficult times of your life. Look at the faithfulness of God. And it may be you don't even yet understand why he's allowed some of the bad things to happen in your life. But if you'll stay faithful, stay true, in time, you too, like Joseph, will look back and say, what they intended for evil, God intended for good. Because here's something about our great God. He's all powerful. He's all good. Therefore, he intends good in our lives. Even when he allows bad in our lives, God intends good.